All right, thank you everyone for staying back. I know it's late, but we're about to have some great conversation. Sierra Pettengill.
Thank you. I'm awake, you're awake, we're all awake.
Yeah, after the day we've had yesterday, I think, and then watching this, we're all very awake. Uh, let's start from sorry. I feel weird saying secretive or something nobody knew about because clearly this was all on public television, just that we didn't know about it. So, where did you start? Like, at what point did, I don't know, where did you start?
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you said that because I do bristle when people talk about, generally about archival films as a whole, but particularly about this one as being sort of lost histories or, newly uncovered, because to me it's very important that this was a public history. RIOTSVILLE was a public program, not a covert one, and the fact that it's forgotten feels more telling about where we are now than the idea that we, couldn't possibly have known. I was reading a book called Nixonland by Rick Perlstein back in 2014, I guess. And
Was that when you were making Reagan House?
yeah, I was thinking the Reagan show. Yeah,
Reagan show.
and I was really struck by there's a section where he is talking about the Newark Rebellion in '67, and there was a report that was written after that called the McCone Commission, which is similar to the Colonel Commission. Newark, and the conclusion of that report was that all instances of violence in Newark were incited by law enforcement, and that the path that the country faced now was whether it was going to face reality or turn towards delusion. And Perlstein says, they were choosing, the public chose delusion, and then he kind of a whole bunch of programs and initiatives that follow in that summer, that kind of this escalating sort of fervor for law and order that becomes, the path of delusion. And so I do think of the film in those terms. It's this like awful, dark fever dream at a fork in the road. So then I found footage of it.
And I read an interview of yours where you said, my first question was about beginning. Now the second question is about ending. And you say in the interview that you turn every stone before you stop. So for something like this, which is barely history because it bleeds into our present so much, when where did you know that you were done, and like when did you know you had enough for a film, and how did you know when to stop?
Well, you run out of time. No, I do. I work with a great team. It's really always weird for me to be on the stage alone. My producer Jaie Laplante is here, back there, also an incredible filmmaker. Yes, and so I was working with a brilliant editor, Nels Bangerter, and a writer, Toby Haslett, and so the process was really this like iterative one where Toby would write something and it would spark a new idea for research for me, and Nels would cut something, it was sort of, so I was researching all the way through to the end, but I think all the pieces had kind of been there for a long time. The June Jordan piece at the end was something I had thought about for the beginning, and it kind of got put aside and then picked back up. And I don't know. I don't know how to stop. I feel like all my films bleed into one another, so I'm sure there's some piece from this that will find its way forward.
And also, you said Toby Haslett wrote what became the voiceover, and I also read that you had initially wanted or imagined the voiceover to be a chorus. So if you can like take us through, what was that conversation like, and how did you end up deciding on one person and then deciding who does it?
Yeah, I should also say, since Toby's not here, he wrote this incredible essay called Magic Actions for N+1, which is a really deeply researched and long piece on the 2020 rebellions, and a sort of historical look back that I think is like a necessary reading. So, and it's online. Yeah, we thought, you know, when we were talking a lot about who the voiceover's perspective is. This person, you know, it's not quoting historical material. It's newly composed. It's written by Toby, but you know, in a collaborative setting. So it's not the voice of Toby. You know, it's supposed to be sort of, we talked about it as like the conscience of America. And so a chorus made sense to try to, and you know, different sections feel like they're written in different ways. You know, there's some parts that are sort of more historical, and more that are angry or poetic. And so we recorded a version with, I think, 7 different voices and actors. You know, it's a pretty maximalist film. You're listening to a lot, you're reading a lot. You know, I've like made this joke. Maybe no one would let me make another film, and so I better get it all in here. and I think, and it felt like all those voices was just too much. Like you're being asked to pay attention to so much, and if a new voice is popping up every 10 minutes, you know, maybe there's one step too far. But
And how did you decide upon?
yeah, Charlene, Jamila was a pretty crucial part of the voiceover casting, and we had sort of thought that the right voice is like both weary and angry, and Charlene was someone who sent in you know, a test audition, and that her voice felt like it hit that to a T. And when we told her that, she was like, "Oh, that is what I am."
Weary and angry.
Weary and angry. Yeah, yeah.
Do we have questions from the audience? So you'll have to raise your hand because I can't see the slide. Yes, there you go.
Thanks for a beautiful film and a really important film. I was wondering if you could talk some about the graphic and musical aesthetics of the film and came to such interesting and unusual choices. How that came about.
Well, thank you. I guess one of the things that was important in this film was to kind of replicate in whatever way I could what it felt like to be going through the archives, to try to piece together something that was more than just sort of a straight chronological, you know, historical contextualization of one of any number of pretty fucked up programs that the American government has imposed upon its citizens. And so we wanted the form of the film to reflect some of that, because to me, I didn't want this to feel like a time capsule where you're immersed in the 60s and you feel like you're in there, because my experience of making it felt so crucial and present tense. And so the idea which the narrator is asking all the time, like, what do we make of this? What do we do with this? What are we looking at? Because that does really feel like that's the question. What do we make of this now? What do we do with this material? And so, particularly in terms of like the graphic choices, it was to try to capture that visually. You know, you're trying to get in as close as you possibly can to the pixels, and that's either a space of openness or sort of pushing you away. And to also just feel, I wanted it to feel like it was 2021. You know, a lot of these images come to us in sort of degraded digital forms and through the internet, and it's research and archival researching and this kind of filmmaking, I think, should be something we all feel kind of capable of doing. And so,
How did you get the book NYC logo to coordinate?
oh,
We had a little talk.
yeah, months of negotiation. And the music is by a composer, Jace Clayton, who is also known as DJ Rupture, who's really amazing. And I started talking to him at the very beginning of the process, so 7 years ago or something, and just kind of kept him updated as the film was changing. And at first we talked about having a kind of deeply sampled score. And then Jace was like, I'm not making music like that anymore. This is what I'm doing now. And I am not a musician, so whatever I butcher of this, I'm so sorry. But the score is composed on modular synthesizers, which are these sort of analog kind of plugs that can only be played once. So there's no re-recording. There's nothing digital about it. And I later found that those sort of mechanisms were first developed by the U.S. military at the same time in the 60s. And so and I think the sound of it captures this strange space. It's like, a technology and a kind of music making from the 60s, but also a really modern sound to it. And so this like uncomfortable bridging between now and then, which I guess is what I was going for with both sound and image.
It's also interesting what you do with sound and pacing, because there's that bit where you let the whole song play, and there's that bit where, the recording was made, either the sound is lost or without sound, and you don't touch it. And then some parts are like very stylistically sounded. So what were those negotiations or conversations like in the edit room?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to replicate. It was a long process, but we talked about the RIOTSVILLE sounds. The RIOTSVILLE scenes are the ones that are the most manipulated and stylized in terms of sound. And Jason and I talked a lot about having the sound design and the music kind of be part of one sort of palette. And so, the helicopters come in, and that's Jace's sound. And those scenes, we talked about them. They should feel uncanny and alien, familiar but alien and sort of unstable. And so we did, that's where we did all the sound work, really. But the silence, I think there's, sound is so emotional. And when, especially in a film that's so touched, all of it's so worked over, the moments where you just let something play, like Burn Baby Burn, uninterrupted, it felt like a necessary emotional coda for Martin Luther King's death. It's like stopping and having an elegy. And, I think in a 90-minute film, when something, is played in full for a few minutes, it has such a weight to it. And the silence, we hired a lip reader to pull out information from those meetings, and didn't get enough to kind of reconstitute what was being said in a meaningful way. So, there's something so jarring and telling about watching basically 24-hour news coverage of a convention where nothing's really happening, and we're watching balloons, and the news anchors themselves are like, nothing going on. I don't know.
Except the Gulf ad.
Yeah, there's nothing to report, and there's barely any reporters on the streets where real material conditions are degrading, where people are making demands, are asking for their politicians to show up, or asking for conversation. Documenting police brutality, and for that to be recorded without any sound. And, there's like 2 cameras at most that we could find at least, feels like it's symbolic of a larger problem of where resources are allocated, and who gets heard.
More questions?
The question was, is RIOTSVILLE still a thing? And yes. Not in the locations that are in the film. There's one being built right now in Atlanta. They're turning a protected forest, into Cop City, is what it's called. And there's a really vibrant protest movement and sort of occupation that's been going on down there. If you Google Stop Cop City, there's a lot of people who've been sort of holding on to that space for over probably a year and a half now. And there's also one being built in Chicago that passed, I forget how much, I want to say 30 million or something, that passed without any community input. But if you Google like tactical scenario village, that's the name that is often used. They're everywhere. I mean, they're.
I think we had another question. Yes.
This question, did you guys hear it? Do I have real rights to the golf ad? Do we have to do any special things to get it on TV? The answer is that love fair use, which is protected by the First Amendment, where there's a lot of material in this film that I'm claiming fair use on, which is that I can reuse it and it's recontextualized in this work. So if Gulf wants to sue me, that sounds fun, but we're pretty legally protected. But no, we did not pay for it. We did, there's a few things throughout the film, some text that lets you know what's public domain and, what something's being recorded for. And
I think that's the night, unless someone has a very pressing question. It's way past all our bedtime, so have a good night.
Thank you so much for coming out on a Wednesday at midnight.
And thank you for being here.
No,
And
thank
thanks for the
you.
film.
Thank you.